So this is the second slideshow in a series on Buddhist symbols, imagining the Buddha. But this one is very specific. It's about a series of Zen pictures called Taming the Bull that originated in China but are now very popular in Japan. So that's the topic I'm going to be talking about today. And why did they make this series of pictures, which are known as Taming the Bull, as I say? Why did they make this series of pictures? Why did they tell this sort of graphic novel story in beautiful Zen brushworks? Well, I think to answer that, one needs to understand what Buddhism is about, what it's trying to do. And I would suggest, well, people say, is it a religion? They often ask this, don't they? Is it a philosophy? Is it a way of life? And I've heard all of these labels used for Buddhism, but I would say that actually Buddhism is a path. It's a whole collection of approaches to life that take you from the predicament you're in now to more and more free, more and more loving states of mind. So I think that's my definition. So if that's right, if Buddhism is primarily a path, the human path, Buddhist teachings are going to be about the path. And what they do is they tell you the different stages of the path. And you probably know about the Noble Eightfold Path, and there are other ones as well that tell you what the stages of the path are. And in fact, we are having this series of talks on the Eightfold Path on Saturday mornings. And in 2 weeks, we'll have Kusala talking about perfect livelihood as a stage on the Eightfold Path. That's on the 9th of May, 2 weeks' time. But you, as well as using concepts, lists, you can also use images and symbols to try to teach the Buddhist path. So this is what the ox herding pictures are about. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. And we'll have a look at the ox herding pictures. And we'll start slideshow. So I hope you can see that. If anyone has problems with seeing what I'm showing, then do put a message in the chat. And I may or may not hear about it, because all I can see at the moment is the slide. So I'm going to talk about Taming the Bull. And 800 years ago in China, some of the great Zen teachers, Zen is called Chan in China, but it's the same basic tradition. They adapted an old folk story, and this folk story was the story of the boy who'd lost his bull. Here he is in this woodcut here. He was supposed to be looking after the bull for the day in the remote mountains, a very common, as it were, profession, especially for youngsters in those days. And what he does step by step, he searches for the bull, he eventually finds it, he tames it. So there are 10 bulls, there are 10 images. They're often called the ox herding pictures. And here's the first one. Yes, there we are, seeking the ox. And each of the pictures has a poem. And I'm going to try and introduce these symbols as symbols for the Buddhist path. And I'm not an expert in Zen. And I'm not going to try to bring out the specific features of Zen Buddhism. I'm going to talk about this as a general Buddhist teaching. Zen, in fact, is basic Buddhism. I mean, it's very, very consistent with the way the Buddha himself taught, in the spirit of that. It's not a divergent tradition. And you can probably see it from the way that they use these traditions, these pictures. So each of the pictures has a poem. These are translated by Roshi Philip Kapleau, a great American Zen teacher. And the first image, just have a look at it. There's the boy. He's lost. Desolate through forests and fearful in jungles, he is seeking an ox, which he does not find. Up and down dark, nameless, wide-flowing rivers, in deep mountain thickets, he treads many bypaths. Bone-tired, heart-weary, he carries on his search for this something which he yet cannot find. At evening, he hears cicadas chirping in the trees. So this is where Buddhism always tends to start, with the sense of something missing, we haven't got it, we're looking for something, we're feeling lost, we feel maybe a lack of meaning, we feel despondent. And there's so much energy that we put into seeking things. The Buddha called this the ignoble quest, the tendency to find answers, to feel that there's something out there that if we find it, if we can only find it, then our lives will be okay. But at the moment, they're just not okay. This huge feeling of lack. Lack is the word that David Loy, another American Zen teacher, uses to translate dukkha, which we usually translate as suffering. But lack is a good one, I think. And we're looking in this ignoble quest for maybe possessions and security, maybe status and recognition, maybe a partner, a family, and we're hoping that those things will provide the solutions. But in this case, the story is just a young boy working on a farm. He's been entrusted with looking after a bull, but he was daydreaming, he was concerned with other things, and now he's lost sight of it. And he's wandering everywhere desperately. He can't go back. A bull is a precious thing, as well as being, of course, a living creature that needs looking after. He can't go back until he finds it. And the evening's drawing in, and you can hear the cicadas chirruping. But this is a very, very lovely touch, I think, the cicadas, the crickets chirping in the trees. And it's a reminder that life is always calling to us. Immediate experience is always there. And maybe it's easiest to find that immediate experience in nature. So if you are going out for a walk, a run during this lockdown period, listen out for the bird song. Maybe even stop and listen to them. And the cicada, it's such a repetitive sound, isn't it? If you've ever listened to crickets or cicadas. And when you live with it all the time, you just blank it out, you stop hearing it. And so that's what we need. We need to not blank out the immediacy of our experience. You need beginner's mind, you need a fresh listen. So this is the first step on the path, is to realize that you're feeling lost. You realize that there are things wrong, but also to apply basic mindfulness, basic awareness, listening to the cicadas. Now here's the second slide, finding the tracks. So innumerable footprints has he seen in the forest and along the water's edge. Over yonder does he see the trampled grass? Even the deepest gorges of the topmost mountains can't hide this ox's nose which reaches right to heaven. So there they are, the footprints, and it looks as if the bull or maybe some other large animal has passed this way, maybe more than one of them. But the footprints are not the bull. He's not yet found the bull. He's just found the footprints. They're just the impressions left behind. So usually if we're feeling lost or feeling empty, feeling lack, the first thing that happens is that we look for ideas and solutions. If it's a spiritual emptiness, we look for systems, religions, or gurus. And maybe we don't think of gazing at, as it were, the awareness itself, which is the source of both the seeking and the feeling lost. Instead, we're looking for tracks, for marks. And fortunately, there are plenty of tracks to find, all sorts of books, organizations, YouTube videos, mindfulness apps, and so on. And in fact, that's what we're doing at the moment. We're participating in one of these tracks of the bull in listening to Dharma teaching. When you encounter Buddhism, you'll find great winding trails of lots of black squiggly marks, rather like the footprints perhaps of birds. But these are the footprints of the Buddha in the form of printed books of teachings. However, in one of these books, a record of the sayings of the Buddha, the Dhammapada, it says that the Buddhas themselves leave no trace. They're like the tracks of birds in the sky. Buddhas are trackless. And this Dhammapada saying passed into Zen Buddhism and became this beautiful tiny poem which says, "There is no place to seek the mind. It is like the footprints of the birds in the sky." There is no place to seek the mind. It's like the footprints of the birds in the sky. So these little tracks that we're following, the teachings that you pick up secondhand, they're not in themselves the direct, immediate experience, but they can point to the way. They can delineate a path, like this path in these pictures of taming the bull. And the very first thing that the Buddha taught when he decided to leave tracks teaching the Dharma, the first thing was the Four Noble Truths. He identified firstly the lack, the lostness, the sense of unsatisfactoriness. And he said that it comes because of the second noble truth, because we're always looking for something different. It comes from craving. But he also said that it's possible to find complete happiness and wisdom. That's the third noble truth, that possibility. But you need to follow a path in order to discover this innate freedom of your own mind. Those are the Four Noble Truths. This lack, what we're doing that creates that lack, the craving, the possibility of freedom, and the path that takes you there. Now the third picture, the first glimpse of the ox. Can you see it? Can you spot it in that picture? A nightingale warbles on a twig. The sun shines on undulating willows. There stands the ox. Where could he hide? That splendid head, those stately horns. What artist could portray them? So now it's not just footprints. We've actually glimpsed something. In the picture, it's just the back end of the bull. But maybe that's not it. Maybe we're mistaken. Maybe it's just a shadow. Maybe it's something else. But it is very, very exciting to get a glimpse of something. And in Buddhist meditation, this is known as a perfect vision experience, that first real glimpse. Now, usually, explanations of the 10 bull pictures, the ox herding pictures, say that the bull is your true nature. Your bull is big mind, as it's called. And the craving, frightened and lost boy is small mind. But somewhere there's the possibility of big mind, the mind which is free, which doesn't even split the world up into a me in here, looking at all that stuff out there. So if that's the right interpretation of the bull, in this third picture, we've got a glimpse of big mind. It's very exciting. And this happens to everybody sometimes. It doesn't have to be a meditation. It might happen through some overwhelming experience, some tragedy, like the death of somebody close, or the beauty of nature, the beauty of art. And that's what's happening here. The boy hears the nightingale singing. The boy feels the sunshine on his skin. If you look in the poem, the boy senses the undulating branches of the willow trees. So it's nature, it's the beauty of nature that's given him this glimpse. It's calmed him down from his restless searching. But even the very fact of life suddenly being different can give you a glimpse of big mind. And in the last few weeks, we've been living in a very, very different, unusual world. So it is an opportunity for perfect vision. It's a fantastic opportunity for seeing things freshly, not just using it as a way to carry on shoring up our rather defensive ego, which will maybe naturally happen with the uncertainty and the anxiety around the situation. But maybe you can see it in terms of the freshness, the fresh possibilities that are there. And the picture shows that the boy's just had a glimpse of the bull's backside. He's got a little sprig of something tasty to entice the bull. He's got a rope in his hand to tie it up, but he's not caught it yet. But in the poem, it says, where could the ox hide? That splendid head, those stately horns. What artist could portray them? So a splendid bull is being described there. Maybe it's the next stage after this one, when he really sees the bull properly. So beautiful that no artist could depict it. Maybe this is a vision he's having. Maybe this is the stage of religious awe. I'd say quite a primitive part of religion, but just when you're overwhelmed by reality. And so that you personify it as God or a savior. But maybe it means more of the sudden vividness that comes over our experience when we're really present, when we're really mindful. And then even that familiar old bull that he's been taking out every day for years becomes a magical beast, a mythic beast, noble and full of strength. And he remembers how privileged he is to have a relationship with the wonderful bull. So the poem, as I say, goes a little bit ahead of this picture. And really, there are not 10 stages to the path to chasing the bull. It's a continuous process. It involves looping back as well as going forward. Sometimes we'll lose sight of the bull completely. We have to go back to the lost phase. We have to go back to the finding the footprints phase. Sometimes we'll leap ahead. The pictures are just snapshot. So it's quite good to fill in the missing links. So now catching the ox, catching the bull. He must tightly grasp the rope and not let it go. For the ox, the bull, still has unhealthy tendencies. Now he charges, that is, the bull charges, up to the highlands. Now he loiters in a misty ravine. And in a way, all you can do, it's a big, strong animal, all you can do is run along after it, trying to keep hold of it. We've caught the bull, we've got a rope around its neck, but it doesn't want to be caught. It wants to gallop around in the mountains, it wants to look for the sweet grass. And when you're finally prepared to turn towards your experience, when you sit immersed in your awareness, in your mind, usually what happens, if you're like me anyway, is all sorts of disturbances come up. And where does this torrent of thought in meditation come from? It's because the mind has been accustomed just to doing its own thing, to look for the sweet grass. It's not accustomed to settling, becoming one-pointed, becoming disciplined. And in fact, the bull in the poem, and if that's the mind, what's it do? It heads for the mountains, and it also goes down into the misty ravines. And again, in meditation, sometimes we're elated, things seem to be going very well, and then we're down, we're feeling pessimistic, we're feeling depressed. And this happens in life as well. It's known as the worldly winds that blow us this way and that, always in pairs. So what do we do when we have all these disturbances in meditation, when we have all these ups and downs? In a way, you make friends with them. You make friends with your instincts and your habits. You make friends with your deep-rooted preferences and tendencies. But it does, for now, need a tether. It needs the self-aware, mindful me that's in charge and doesn't want to just give in to every inclination. During lockdown, it's very tempting, I find, just to open the fridge and look for something to snack on and to lose my sense of my integrity, my health, and so on. So we do need some discipline to practice Buddhism. The bull does need to be tamed. Now, explaining the bull in this way rather contradicts what I was saying earlier about what the bull might represent. The usual explanation, the bull is big mind, it's intrinsic awareness. But if that's the case, why is it so rebellious? And I think it's because it's a little bit of a mistake that Zen people sometimes make of talking about the wonderful, the face before you were born, the intrinsic awareness, the big mind, as if it was something else, something that we're not in contact with. Actually, this is our experience at present. It may be wild, it may be governed by craving, but it's still the reality of our mind. And it's a mind that can be cultivated. It's a mind that can become big. At the moment, it's in conflict. The boy is tugging on the tether, trying to restrict the bull's behavior. The bull is wanting to get away and find the sweet grass. And sometimes that's the case. Our mind is in conflict, but it can become united. It can become integrated. So the fifth picture is taming the ox. He must hold the nose rope tight and not allow the ox to roam, lest off to muddy haunts it should stray. See if I can move this image. Properly tended, it becomes clean and gentle. Untethered, it willingly follows its master. You must hold the nose rope tight and not allow the ox to roam, lest off to muddy haunts it should stray. Properly tended, it becomes clean and gentle. Untethered, it willingly follows its master. And sometimes in meditation, you'll find, quite unexpectedly perhaps, that the bull is happily, like this, happily trotting along at your heels. And from taming the raging bull of the previous stage to always walking along with a tame bull, this is truncating a huge amount of work and discipline and meditation, a long process. And the bull of your mind may be tame sometimes, but by the next meditation session, it could be very, very skittish once again. So we have to remember that. Anyway, here it's you and your mind. They are friends. In fact, there is simply one unified awareness now, flowing and effortless. In a way, it seems normal and natural. It's the state of mind where you're deeply absorbed in a task or a conversation, or maybe listening to music, or just lying in the park looking up through the branches of a tree. You're just fully there. The bull is happily trotting along. But this is temporary. It's not something that will necessarily last. It's not quite there yet. We're only halfway through the sequence. This is number 5 of 10 after all. And the boy still has to be quite cautious. He has to hold fast to the tether because he knows the ox might change its mind and stray off to muddy haunts. So what next? So in the next picture, we find the boy is riding on the ox. Riding free as air, he buoyantly comes home through evening mists in wide straw hat and cape. Wherever he may go, he creates a fresh breeze, while in his heart profound tranquility prevails. This ox requires not a blade of grass. Riding free as air, he buoyantly comes home through evening mists in wide straw hat and cape. Wherever he may go, he creates a fresh breeze, while in his heart profound tranquility prevails. This ox requires not a blade of grass. There's no need to leave the bull. In fact, the bull is carrying you now. You're so immersed in your basic awareness that creativity is starting to flow. So you pick up your flute and you play a tune. So it's a supremely joyful state of mind when you're deeply absorbed, when you don't have to do anything to be fully present. It's a flow state. It's effortless mindfulness. And there's no craving. The bull is as happy as the boy. It's forgotten about its hunger, craving for the sweet grasses. And it trots along perfectly contented with the flautist on its back. It's approaching the little bridge over the river, hoping to get to the other side. Now, number 7, ox forgotten, self alone. Only on the ox was he able to come home, but lo, the ox is now vanished, and alone and serene sits the man. The red sun rides high in the sky as he dreams on placidly. Yonder, beneath the thatched roof, his idle whip and idle rope are lying. So can you see this progression? At first, the boy was so separated from the bull that he couldn't even find it. Then he saw traces, then a glimpse. Then he caught the bull, but it struggled against him. And then it was tamed, following on along behind, and he rode on its back. And now the unification is complete. And it's complete because we don't see the bull at all. There's now only one mind there, not two minds. And the boy has come home. The bull is safely in its stall. There's no more work to do. And he can sit outside in the garden, enjoying the evening sun. And this picture of sitting outside a little hut in the countryside with the sun shining makes me think of going on solitary retreats, little cottage, a solitary meditation retreat. And if you've ever done that, you'll know what an incredible relief it is just not to have to do anything, to have nothing at all to do. I remember my own teacher, Sangharakshita, I asked him once, what should I do about my overactive, overbusy mind? And he said, well, just do nothing for half an hour every day. And that was the most difficult instruction or piece of advice I've ever received. Sounds simple, doesn't it, to do nothing? But on a solitary retreat, at least it's easy. You can just sit and do nothing at all. Because a lot of our lives, we're living compulsively. We're trying to complete tasks. The to-do list is always pestering us with more that has to be achieved. So if you can get to a state where you're not chasing anything, you're fully present, it's quite a rare state to be in. And maybe under the lockdown, you've got a chance to do that sometimes, or not to do that. And in the poem, and the boy is usually just sitting at ease, but in one set of pictures I saw, he's actually holding his hands up in the prayer mudra, raising his folded hands to the sun in the sky, the red sun. And he seems to be offering devotion to it. And I think this shows that devotion is quite an advanced practice. One for being fully present, fully there. It's not for the novice. And it's a response to when you feel fully integrated. Perhaps it's the response of gratitude and the response of love towards the natural world. Okay, both ox and man, or both ox and self, are forgotten. The whip, the rope, the ox, and the man alike belong to emptiness, so vast and infinite the azure sky that no concept of any sort can reach it. Over a blazing fire, a snowflake cannot survive. When this state of mind is realized, comes at last comprehension of the spirit of the ancient patriarchs. Or the other versions of the poem say, you find the tracks of the ancient patriarchs, you find the footprints. And where do you find them? In this circle. So it's an empty circle. It's an empty circle freely drawn with a brush. Maybe this is the real emblem of Zen Buddhism. In Japan, the circle is called the Enso. And it's not trying to be a perfect circle made with compasses. It's intended to be free. It's intended to be complete. It's intended to be spontaneous. So I suggest you try the Enso. And nobody can say, I can't draw a circle. It doesn't have to be good. You just pick up a brush, get some nice thick cartridge paper if you can, dip the brush in some ink or thin paint, and make the Enso, draw the Enso. And I'll just show you a couple of other examples of this form of Zen art, regarded as great treasures of Japanese artistic culture. So there's a nice, vigorous, spontaneous Enso there. I'm not sure who did that one. This one is by Taido Shufu, I think from last century. And this one is by Hakuin, the great Rinzai Zen master Hakuin, who is in the picture on the right. He's from a few hundred years back. He was very well known as a calligrapher, as well as one of the greatest of the Zen teachers. So this circle signifies emptiness, shunyata. Go back to the one in our series. I prefer, instead of emptiness, the word openness. And it's like the endless radiant blue sky. This is the blue sky. In Tibetan Buddhism, they will just paint a sheet of paper blue. In Japanese Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, they will make the enso. Emptiness is the possibility of endless transformations. And that's Martin Batchelor, another Western Zen teacher, says that. Emptiness is the possibility of endless transformations. You're not getting in the way, and your innate Buddha nature can shine through. So think of that as a shining through, that we get in the way, in a sense, of ourselves. And the openness means allowing reality itself, the illumination of awareness, just to shine. So as a state of mind, emptiness is a pure and open awareness. And in the state of emptiness, thinking, conceptualizing, labeling have died away. Thoughts evaporate as soon as they appear, and that's the meaning of the snowflake. The snowflakes falling into a bonfire, they're just gone as soon as they appear. But, as you probably know from the Heart Sutra, emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. So the circle is not enough, it's not the end of it. The rich world of human experience is just as real as the open circle of emptiness, as the thought-free state. There's nothing wrong with thoughts, but it's good to have a background, if you can, of emptiness. So we don't finish here. The very first series of these Taming the Bull pictures actually finished with the end. So they thought, oh, this is it. This is enlightenment. This is the end. But then one of the great masters realized, no, that's not the case. We have more to do. And so here is the first stage of the more to do, returning to the source. He has returned to the origin, come back to the source, but his steps have been taken in vain. It's as though he were now blind and deaf. Seated in his hut, he hankers not for things outside. Streams meander on of themselves, red flowers naturally bloom red. He's returned to the origin, come back to the source. That's a very common metaphor in Zen, finding the original you, but not the original you going back in time, going back to being a baby or something, but the original you outside time altogether. So having realized emptiness, the boy also realizes form and emptiness. And the pictures are always a little landscape or nature scene showing plants and trees and blossoms, sometimes birds in this one. No human beings there. And no bull, no boy. So he can let all of this just happen. He can let nature happen of itself. The life of the world continues. It looks after itself. He doesn't want anything to be different, as if he was blind and deaf. He doesn't want anything to be different, as if he was unaware of it all, but he is actually supremely aware. And this message that comes from nature is the message of interdependence, how everything forms one great web of life, and our sense of isolation, our sense of separateness is something artificial that we've imposed. We can feel in touch, we can feel connected, even at one with the rest of life, the interconnected web of life. The emptiness of the previous picture has the message that labels, explanations, they're all just provisional. Open, actual awareness is empty of those labels, of those explanations, of those words. But we do live in this teeming and fertile world full of beauty, so we return from emptiness to ordinary life. But in returning to ordinary life from emptiness, we don't take seriously what are called the causally originated semblances, the apparent things going on in life which come out of the processes of conditioned arising, the web of life, the interconnectedness of life. But this is only number 9. We have one more picture. So what could possibly come after this? We've had emptiness, we've had form, everything is returned to the source. Now there's no boy, there's no bull. So what happens next? entering the marketplace with helping hands. Bare-chested, barefooted, he comes into the marketplace, muddied and dust-covered. How broadly he grins, without recourse to mystic powers. Withered trees he swiftly brings to bloom. So now we've got the very first picture with two human beings in it, actually, which is significant. And the figure on the left is actually a well-known Zen character. And this Zen character is known as Putai. Putai means the bag monk. So he has a bag, and he also has a gourd in a basket, probably containing sake, rice wine. And the bag is full of gifts, especially for children. And it's said that this was a historical figure in the Tang Dynasty, China, and he was a street liver. He was a homeless man who lived on the streets of Beijing, and he always carried with him a bag full of gifts for the children. The children would gather around him, he would play with them. He was always supremely happy, laughing, in fact. And it's said that when Putai died, the emperor's preceptor went in to see the emperor and said, "The most enlightened man in China has just died." And after he died, people thought that he'd been the Buddha Maitreya, the loving one, in human form. So people often call him the Laughing Buddha, and you'll see statues and pictures of the Laughing Buddha all over the place in Chinese Buddhism. And in fact, in the West, this Chinese monk has rather usurped sometimes the traditional image of the Indian historical Buddha, so that people think that Buddhas are fat and laugh a lot. So maybe that clears up a little puzzle you might have had about the fat Buddha. And I'll show you some other examples. There we go, Putai, the Laughing Buddha. Strings of money, as well as his bag of gifts, and a rattle, so people know he's coming. And there in a temple, there he's enthroned on a lotus as Maitreya, as the Buddha to come, the loving one, the Buddha as a bodhisattva, as someone intent on making people happy and bringing laughter and happiness to everybody. So going back to our ox herding pictures, the ox herder is now an adult, because the ox herder is the one on the left. He doesn't have the anxieties that he suffered when he lost his bull. He doesn't need anything. He's giving everything away. He's in the marketplace. He's sharing jokes. He's just a friend to everybody. He's somebody who brings happiness in his wake.
Ratnaprabha.
Yes.
So there is a question actually which chimes in with what you're saying from Hartley, which he says, is there significance in the boy becoming a man?
Yes, there is. I'll mention that now if you like. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me this is adulthood, this is maturity, but there are two beings in this picture. So in a way, who is it? Who's the boy in the picture? The boy has got a sort of a Dick Whittington style stick with a bag on the end of it. So he's obviously on a journey and he's met the man. And it seems to me, this is just my thought about it, it seems to me that this is the mature, laughing, even enlightened end of the path person meeting the beginning of the path person. And it's going full loop. He's meeting himself, he's meeting the boy, the innocent and suffering and lost boy in the beginning. And at the beginning, the boy didn't really have any help. The only help he had was the tracks he could see in the mud. In other words, it's as if you were trying to practice Buddhism just based on books, but actually you really need to meet somebody. The boy in a way is meeting his own future self. And maybe that's what we do when we meet a more experienced practitioner, even just a little bit more experience, has got a bit of a grounding in meditation. It can be really, really helpful. Even if we just meet each other, if we have that kalyana mitrata, that spiritual friendship, So here the boy has become an adult, and the adult is a spiritual friend, meeting people, meeting real people, and having a real effect on them. He's giving them presents from his bag, but he's giving them a lot more than that. He's giving them teachings as well. And thanks for the question. Yeah. So he makes the withered trees bloom. Somehow life comes back into what is dead in the presence of a Buddha. Maybe even the imagined presence of a Buddha. What seems to be finished and dead blooms again, like an old withered tree. And we realize that we may feel time is passing, we may feel jaded and so on, but we can all bloom, we can all produce flowers once again. And a sense of enlightenment being present in our lives, I think, makes a difference to that. The sense that there is somewhere, as it were, there's somewhere to go.
There's another question, Ratnaprabha. I don't know if you want to take that now or.
Yeah, give it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question from Maisie. Says, are there animals in Buddhism that are models of discipline and awareness, or are they always depicted as needing taming, as part of the mind that goes awry?
That's a very good question, actually. There are animals that are models of discipline and taming, but it's because they've been disciplined or tamed. So the horse trainer is often featured in Buddhism, with the horse that becomes gentle and docile. But the taming seems to be a rather like a horse whispering process. It's not a process of using violence and using coercion. It's a question of gradually enticing the animal. Yeah, so horses, elephants as well. There's often the contrast between the wild rutting elephant and the tame elephant. But yeah, no, I can't think of any animals in Buddhist tradition who in a way are naturally already tame, although there are many animals that become heroes in Buddhist stories. And in that sense, they have provided their own discipline, I suppose. They've not been disciplined by a human being. They've disciplined themselves through their own practice.
We were talking about lions last week as well, weren't we, as a symbol of sort of nobility and kind of superiority and wisdom. We were talking about the idea of the lion's roar. I don't know if you were here last week, Maisie, but so in a sense, sort of the lion's not tame, but it's kind of a symbol of, it's a symbol for wisdom, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it is dangerous. And maybe even the tamed bull is still dangerous. Maybe our own mind is still dangerous. We don't want it to be too tame. We want it just to be like a circus animal, resentfully jumping through hoops. We want the mind to have its energy, don't we? The energy is really important. So there's quite a balance to achieve there, I think. And of the bull, in a way, the boy and the bull do become one. There's no longer a separate boy and bull. So yeah, this is the future self, maybe. He's bringing gifts. He's bringing his cheerfulness to the anxious, searching boy who was so alone at the beginning. So this is said to be the duty of Buddhism, is not to rest in the empty circle, not even to rest in nature, not to rest in a thought-free mind, not just to be a spectator in the play of interconnectedness in the natural world. What you want to do is to go back into the marketplace, the busy life of humanity. And you go back, in another translation of this, it says he goes back with bliss-bestowing hands. He goes back with bliss-bestowing hands, engaging with the world, trying to make it a better place, and bringing whatever gifts you have and sharing them. So these are the 10 pictures. I will show them another version of them so you can have another look through them. And you could see them as representing a path where you progress from one stage to another, leaving the previous one behind. But in a way that won't really work, because you always progress in loops or in spirals. You have to return to previous stages. Maybe you have an intimation already of some of these higher stages. So we can consider all the 10 pictures at once, and you can see what they mean for you. You can take them seriously. You can imagine with each one, look at it, say, well, okay, imagine I'm there now. What does this tell me? What does this teach me? It's an image that's teaching you. Even the poem is not really intended to be conceptual. It's intended to evoke the story of the boy who's lost his bull. Don't be desperate just to leap into the next picture. Stay with whatever picture works for you now. I'll show you a couple of alternative versions. This is from a few hundred years ago, an ancient one. By Tensho Shubon. So the lost boy and the boy finding footprints. The boy glimpsing the ox and then tethering it as it runs wild. Leading the ox docilely behind him, riding on the ox, playing his flute. Sometimes he's facing backwards while he's riding the ox. That would be an interesting thing to think about. Why is he facing backwards? And then there he is, holding his folded hands up to the red sun in the sky as he sits outside his little hut. And then we have the Enso, the Zen circle, which maybe echoes the sunshine, the sun. And then we have returning to source, the tree and the rock and the flowers. And then we have back in the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands and the withered tree flowering above, talking to the pilgrim boy. And here's a modern one by an American graphic artist, Mark T. Morse. So he's searching, he's finding the footprints, he's glimpsed the bull, he's grabbing it by the horns. Now it's tame, but still looking rather surly in the upper right. And he's riding on it, and then he's just alone without the bull. And then the Enso actually just turns into more of a Don Quixote picture of striding off into the wilderness. And then we have, the nature, the bull and the man in nature, and then the bull and the man just going about their lives. Kakwan was the name of the guy that wrote the poems and did the original 10 ox herding pictures. Here's a very simple version of them.
There's another question, Ratnaprabha. Yeah. So from Hartley, he says, is Putai depicted as fat simply because he was, or does this represent something? And the wealth he's shown to possess, is that symbolic or also part of what he gives to people?
Well, it's again, in a way, this picture, you have to let the picture speak for itself, I suppose. But it is a fat and jolly monk. What does that convey? I mean, is it suggesting that you should get overweight, for example, and just eat as much as you can? But there's something maybe, that image for us, even in fiction and on the television and in films, of the person who's completely happy with themselves, who isn't worried about their own appearance, and who doesn't even care where he sleeps. Apparently, he would happily sleep out even in the winter all night. And he was destitute, but yet somehow he had a bag full of gifts, and he was always laughing, the laughing Buddha. Sometimes he's actually shown with children climbing all over him, because the children would love to come and see him and be given gifts by him. He's sort of a Father Christmas figure, I suppose, isn't he? Imagine maybe change the ox herding, so there it's Father Christmas going ho 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 with his reindeer and his bag of gifts. But the images do need to speak for themselves to some extent, and I don't know the answers to that. I don't know why Putai, presumably, maybe he really was fat and jolly. That's certainly the legend about him. Now, here are all of the stages together, and they're next to the Tibetan version, which is interesting just to compare them. And in the Tibetan version on the right, you'll see it uses an elephant instead of a bull. And the elephant is covered in black mud or grey mud, and this slowly gets washed off as it journeys up a spiral path with a monk and a monkey and a burst of flame. Also has 10 stages. And that could be another slideshow some other time, couldn't it? To sort of go into the rather detailed symbolism of the Tibetan version. Okay, so I'm going to stop the sharing now, and I hope you found that of interest. And I'm hoping that has recorded on YouTube. We shall see afterwards. If you want to see it again anyway, have a look out on YouTube, and I hope you'll find it there. And we'll carry on doing that. Next week, the theme will be Meeting the Buddhas on the 2nd of May. And then on the 9th of May, we've got a talk from Kusala on the Noble Eightfold Path on perfect livelihood. And then the 10th of May is Buddha Day, the Buddha Day festival, mythic beings at the Buddha's awakening. I'll give a slideshow again on Buddha Day in the afternoon, I think at 2 o'clock. And we'll carry on with those.